This is our paper slide project of the epic revolution. First was the Treaty of Paris. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris granted England all of French lands in Canada, rule over India, and rights to the Caribbean slave trade. Spain won French land, lost Florida to England, and won Louisiana. France lost Canada, but claimed the east of the Mississippi River. Next was the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was fought between 1756 to 1763. The French and Indian War, or in other words, the 7 Years' War, was considered the Great War for Empire. This war formed an imperial struggle between Britain and France. The Albany Plan of Union declared all colonies to join together or die. The Albany Union did not pass. British invaded French in Canada, and war began. The war came to an end with the presence of the Treaty of Paris. This is King George III. He was the ruler of Britain and the imposer of all the taxes against the colonists to reduce profit. Next is Pontiac's Rebellion. In 1763, Pontiac's Rebellion was the first intentional germ warfare. British infected the natives' blankets with smallpox at Fort Detroit. Next is the Currency Act. The Currency Act in 1764 was when the British took away colonial rights to print money. British taxes and debts were to be paid in specie. Most affected by this act were the farmers. Next was the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act in 1764 was the first act where funds were raised for the Crown. The tax on sugar created a direct taxation for money for the Crown. Next is the Virginia Resolves. As a consequence to the Stamp Act, the Virginia Resolves, presented by Patrick Henry, laid out the rights of Englishmen in the colonies.
In 1765, the presence of the Quartering Act allowed it so if you were asked to, you must house and feed a British soldier in your home. In 1765, the House of Burgesses accepted the Stamp Act, whose prime purpose was to raise money for British military stationed in the colonies. The Stamp Act Congress created a unity between 27 delegates from 9 colonies. The consequence of the Stamp Act was the Virginia Resolves. The Townshend Act placed a tax on lead, paint, paper, glass, tea, and silk. This was an external tax placed on the colonies with the purpose of funding the government. John Dickinson wrote The Letter from a Farmer in Pennsylvania in 1767. This document stated that Parliament could not exercise its power to raise revenue for itself in the colonies. The Boston Massacre started when colonists began to throw snowballs filled with seashells and rocks at the British regulars. When a British regular opened fire on the crowd, 11 were injured and killed, and Paul Revere created a propaganda pamphlet that would never be forgotten. When Britain granted the British East India Company a monopoly in the colonies, the colonists were outraged. On December 16, 1773, the Sons of Liberty took the situation into their own hands. They dressed up as local natives and dumped 342 crates of tea into the Boston harbor. The Intolerable Acts, or in other words, the Coercive Acts of 1773, is a response to the Boston Tea Party and closed Boston ports.
This map of the Quebec Act shows how the colonists were not allowed to expand into Canada and in result kept them boxed in the colonies along the East Coast. Delegates from all 13 colonies developed the First Continental Congress in a response to the Intolerable Acts. These delegates sent a letter, the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, which tells King George III the rights they feel as if the colonists deserve. The Second Continental Congress in 1775 created the decision that the colonists were going to go to war against Britain. Elected by the Second Continental Congress, George Washington became the commander of the Continental Army. Published on January 10, 1776, written by Thomas Paine, is the pamphlet Common Sense. The purpose of this document was to challenge authority of the British government and royal monarchy. It was the first work to openly ask for independence from Great Britain. Significant from his writing of Common Sense Thomas Paine used the plain language in which he spoke in his piece, Spoke to Common People of America. The Olive Branch Petition was the last-ditch effort to avoid war with Britain. Colonists were pleading, "Don't make us do this." The Declaration of Independence granted the 13 colonies independent from British rule on July 4, 1776. The document stated that the 13 colonies regarded themselves as 13 sovereign states.
And this is our epic revolution project.